This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the Women's Room, where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Kat Selm. Kat is a climate activist, a biologist who stewards conservation lands, and a co-founder of Conejo Climate Coalition. We're so happy to have you here today, Kat.
I'm so happy to be here, Kathleen. Thank you for this time. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, let's go then. Kat's activism made an impact on me, and I am especially inspired by hearing about the process she went through to find the best way to use her talents and energy for the good of the planet. We here in the Women's Room are well aware that women have a critical role to play in climate change. Let's start out with the sobering idea that all we do individually, actions such as recycling, conserving energy and water, reusable bags, and so forth, may not be enough to curb climate change in time. Would you speak to this startling opinion, Kat? You are not implying that we should discard our individual efforts, are you? What should we be doing?
That's a great question. And no, absolutely not. I think we should be doing all that we as individuals are capable of doing to address the climate crisis. So I would not say that people should discard their individual efforts at all. But what I do want to say about individual versus collective action is this, that in 2004, BP Oil hired a public relations firm to try to improve its image. And the result was the development of something that you maybe have heard about, which is the carbon footprint calculator. So that's what BP had developed to try to
Oh,
improve their image. And it's pretty insidious and it's kind of ingenious because what it does is it puts the guilt and the blame on us, the consumer, for consuming these oil and gas products. So, my message to anyone listening to your program today is that it's not our fault that we weren't given a choice about the system that we're born into. And it's the responsibility of politicians and corporations and the oil and gas industry to really change the systems that we're living in right now. So I think what we can do as private citizens is to vote with our dollars for sure, but also to show politicians that we care about their climate platforms. And especially at local election times, because those are often overlooked elections that can actually have a lot of impact on our emissions if we vote the right politicians in. So if we're all acting individually on climate, then it becomes collective action. And then that collective
yeah.
action can spur the types of system level change that we need to actually fight the crisis. So, no, Kathleen, I wouldn't tell anyone to stop acting individually, but we do need to remember who is really to blame for the mess that we're in.
Oh, well, thank you for that because I often feel guilty of conditioning on, which I hardly
Absolutely.
ever do.
Yeah, but
Okay,
we just have to live the lives that we're able to live and try to do it as low impact as possible, but not to be living in guilt. That's not a sustainable way to live. So
right, exactly. Well, thank you for that. So, what can you do or anyone do by working collectively or in a coalition that you're not able to do as an individual?
oh, I think you can do quite a lot more with more people. I mean, for one, I think just building a community of like-minded people is worth its weight because this work is really emotionally difficult. You've heard the term existential dread. That's how a lot of people feel about climate change. So
Yeah.
just having people to work with is really valuable. And another thing is when I was a lone wolf sort of activist, maybe I would write some letters during election time or throughout the week, I would sign some pledge online, but I didn't really know what I should be doing. And I felt like it was overwhelming. I didn't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
So when I formed this group with these other people, I got some direction and just got more done. So we can bounce ideas off of each other, we can strategize together, and because we have more diverse talent than just myself, we can accomplish more than if it was just my own skill set and availability alone. So it's a way to energize yourself, but also to feel more powerful and activated.
Okay. Well, you touched on your story, but let's talk about it a little more and how you made a transition, or perhaps a better word, an evolution to activism. How did you turn the days when you feel despair into action?
That is a good word, evolution. I've evolved in my own career, first as a scientist to a conservation practitioner to an activist, largely because I realized that the number one threat to all life on Earth is climate change. So, to be honest, I don't really feel like I had much of a choice but to work on climate change. Um, so I went into biology and botany and then conservation because I love plants, especially wildflowers.
Uh-huh.
And I started to feel more and more that helping to save those plants wasn't enough for me to feel like I was doing enough, like I was being actionable. And some of my more desperate thoughts at those times were like, what good is it to be able to save some plants from a building development if the entire species is at risk from rising temperatures and increasing drought? So, species, they're able to adapt to climate change often by shifting their range. And what we mean is like going up in elevation or something like
Oh,
that to
uh-huh.
adapt to the impacts of climate change. But, now we live in what we call highly fragmented habitats because we're so developed, right? You look at Southern
Oh,
California, it's so
uh-huh.
developed. There's so much human activity that there's not a lot of ways for animals to really shift their ranges to adapt to climate change. So I felt like, okay, my work needs to be focusing on the root of the problem, which is fossil fuel emissions, so that species can live in the
Uh-huh.
world. Um,
Right, right.
so I understand that probably not a lot of people will agree with this, maybe not even a lot of biologists, but it's just my own personal and emotional journey to finding my life's purpose and developing my career.
Okay, well, thank you. And so, as a biologist, you're ideally suited to talking about the systems that constitute our environment. Would you paint a picture so your listener can get a sense of how you and other biologists think about the environment?
Oh, I love that question. And I love it because I don't think that a lot of people really get the time or the space to think about the environment. And it's because we're just surrounded by human built environment all the time. So, getting a chance to step outside that and think about the world as this holistic system of parts is something that I don't think we do very often. But that's how I think a lot of biologists think of the world. It's an interconnected system. And that's why, you've probably heard the term web of life, something like
Huh?
that. That's why people describe it that way. But that interconnectedness is what makes climate change so scary because one link in that chain being broken can have catastrophic consequences for many species, but also just natural processes. So I think maybe one good example to really wrap your head around that is a local one. So kelp forests. We have kelp forests even here in Ventura County, all stretching all across the coastline, and they rely on an intricate web of predators and prey. And currently, the system is super out of whack because sunflower sea stars, which are the top predator of purple urchins, are
Uh-huh.
dying off from a wasting disease. The wasting disease is caused by warmer ocean temperatures due to climate change. So the urchins are now sort of unchecked. They can do whatever they want because the sea stars aren't eating them. So they're feeding on all the kelp they can get a hold of. And they're really just decimating these kelp forests up and down the coast.
Oh, uh-huh.
So this is really bad for two reasons. It impacts climate change adaptation and also carbon sequestration because kelp forests grow really fast. When they die and they fall to the sea floor and get buried by sediments, they're sequestering a lot of carbon really quickly, faster than forests can
Uh-huh.
do. So if the urchins are eating off all of this kelp, we're losing the ability to sequester the carbon, but what we're also losing is adaptation to climate change because as
You
we get,
mean our adaptation?
yeah, exactly. I
Uh-huh.
mean, we live in a coastal town, right, in Ventura.
Right.
So um, kelp forests can protect shorelines from erosion because of wave action and increasing storms due to climate change because they buffer that impact, right? Kind of like how wetlands do on the coast too. So
Uh-huh.
it's a climate change caused problem and it also impacts our ability to adapt to climate change. So it's kind of complicated and intricate, but that's just one example of how life systems are on this planet. And it's a really good local example, I think, of why we should be protecting nature to help solve the climate crisis.
Right. Well, that's a good one. So you've talked about the wildflowers and how they were motivating for you, and you find them a blessing, and they helped you in your search for the most useful way for you to serve as an activist. Sorry. Would you sketch the story of what the wildflowers' disappearance means to you?
Yeah, I'll try. It's kind of a hard question because it's really hard to describe why I love nature, to be honest. It's hard to think about why. Feeling excited about the natural world and curious to explore it, it's kind of like falling in love. You know, you can't really describe the conditions, but when you're in it, everything else just melts away.
Oh, great metaphor.
So I can't really say for sure why wildflowers or mountain streams or slimy salamanders get me curious and joyful and excited about the natural world. I just can't. But I know that that's a feeling that I have. And as an adult, you know, I have a unique perspective of living times completely outside as a field biologist, living for months on end outdoors. And then contrasting that, I've lived in urban environments with very little nature around me. So I understand firsthand the psychological impacts of living without nature. And I know that it's just not healthy for me. And I suspect that many of us feel that way too. So the times when I was outside a lot, I felt more balanced, more emotionally healthy. I slept better and I just felt more like a real person. Can't really
Uh-huh.
describe it better than that. Just felt like a real human. So these experiences have led me to want to save what I love and to share it with the people that I love and share it with as many people as I can. So in my career in conservation, I've worked on open space projects, mostly in low income communities, because I believe we all need access to nature. And I think that people least responsible for environmental degradation are often the ones bearing the brunt of the impacts to nature. And they're
Oh.
also the people that are usually have the least access to clean air and safe drinking water.
Mm.
Mm.
So, why does activism work? How do you know? How do you know that? And what signs are there?
Hmm. You know, personally, I can't say that I do know that it works. I can't predict that what I'm doing with people will work out or not, but I do know that I have to try and that I'm more powerful in a group. But I can point to some examples of where activism has really changed the game. And one of them is a great modern example is the sunrise movement. And if you've heard of the Green New Deal, have you heard of that before?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure a
About,
lot of your listeners probably have too. And those words, we wouldn't know about them if it wasn't for the Sunrise Movement. And this is a group of young 20 somethings that are using civil rights movement playbook to
oh,
demand climate solutions now. And they started out as just a group of young people trying to get their colleges to divest of fossil fuels. And while they're doing that, they're also writing the Green New Deal while they're still in college. Today, they're one of the most influential progressive movements on Capitol Hill. And in the 2020 election, every single Democratic candidate was coming to them to get them to help draft their climate plans and
oh.
their platforms. So this is huge. This is just young people changing politics in this country, and that's what collective action looks like. So I have to hope that sometimes our actions do have impacts, and it's beautiful when you get to see it, but you don't always get to see it. You just have to have
Right.
faith.
Okay, well, that was a great example. So, your activism has led you to co found the Conejo Climate Coalition. What is the mission of the coalition? Now, you work to influence policy, right? So, would you put us in the picture of how you and others go about doing that?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about Conejo Climate Coalition because it's what I'm really passionate about. Maybe before I answer your questions, though, I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started. And we are a small group at this point, but we are all people who felt some way personally impacted by climate change. And some of us have been in recent mega fires, as we all have been here in Southern California. Some of us had fossil gas induced asthma in our families,
Oh,
or have felt the emotional impacts of biodiversity loss, like myself as a biologist. So we all came together because we realized that climate change is not just a topic for environmentalists. It affects all of us. It's personal and it's a public health issue. It's a food issue. It's a national security issue. It touches all of our lives. So we all felt like we needed to get together really to rally around two constitutional documents that are being drafted in Thousand Oaks right now, which is the Thousand Oaks General Plan and the Climate and Environmental Action Plan. So these are documents that decide policy decisions for the coming decades in our city. And several of our founding members were all a part of other climate organizations working in Ventura County, but lived in Thousand Oaks and realized, oh, we need something to focus locally on these issues so that we can help guide the direction of our city for the coming decades. So our mission, I can read it off to you here because I don't have it memorized, but we are a grassroots coalition that advocates for plans and policies that preserve and enhance our natural surroundings while building a healthy, just, resilient, minimal waste, regenerative, and fossil-free community that will thrive and prosper for generations into the future. And it's a lofty mission, but we do have a lot of arms that we're trying to exercise at this moment, where we write letters to the editor, we're on social media, we do petitions and policy endorsements, we go to every city council meeting and comment on issues. We meet with our local planning commissioners, city council members, developers, utilities, pretty much any decision maker in the city and the county that will talk with us, we talk with. And we also do public education. We like public speaking and doing things like this. So thank you so much for having me here today to talk about climate change. And we also do Fridays for Future rallies. You can find those on Instagram. And we have monthly newsletters that you can sign up for. So we're pretty busy for just a group of volunteers. We have our hands in a lot of cookie jars, but we're basically just trying to get the topic of climate change surrounding municipal decisions to be a part of that decision-making process.
okay. Well, we're going to have to take a station break right here to identify ourselves. We'll be right back. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good. My guest today is Kat Selm, who is a climate activist, a biologist who stewards conservation lands, and a co-founder of Conejo Climate Coalition. And we're back, and we were just talking about the Conejo Climate Coalition, and it leads right into my next question about local. Why have you come to the conclusion that climate change needs to be addressed, not only collectively, but on a local level? Why is local ground zero for change?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd love to answer it because I feel very passionately that this is true, that cities right now are taking the lead in climate action worldwide. And that's for a couple reasons. One is that at a more local level, um, cities are more nimble than state and federal governments.
Ah,
And they're both more in tune with the challenges that their communities face, as well as the solutions that they could actually accomplish for their residents. So I think that acting locally but thinking globally is really where the action is. An example of this is like if you're on Capitol Hill and you're trying to get a meeting with a state or a federal legislator, it's a lot harder than a city council member that you might bump into on the street or that you can
uh-huh.
just call their
Yeah,
office. You can have way more personal relationships, I think. You can actually meet your leaders, whereas you'd have to be like a lobbyist or something if you were on a federal
right.
level.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's where politics and ordinary citizens can really influence what their world looks like. That, and we're failing miserably right now, globally, federally, and somewhat on the state level, even to rise to the significant emission reductions that we need to protect us from future climate impacts, current climate impacts,
Uh-huh.
really. So cities have the opportunity to pick up the pace and do it in a way that's actually catered to their community. And a perfect example of this is the fact that 42 cities and counties in California have approved local ordinances to ensure all new electric construction with no natural gas hookups. That's just
Oh.
one way that cities are leading and pushing the envelope and making state government work harder and faster to keep up pace with what cities are doing. It's amazing.
When you talked about phasing out natural gas when we spoke previously, my first thought was I prefer cooking on gas to electric. So, how can you reassure listeners who feel the same way? And what is the plan to phase out natural gas?
I too was like you, and this is the first time in my life I've ever had a gas stove, and I'm not originally from California. I noticed that gas stoves are a pretty big thing here. I'd never run into them before, so
Oh,
I do actually enjoy cooking on one. So I get why you feel that way, but I just want to reassure your listeners that many activists, including the Conejo Climate Coalition, are advocating for all electric utilities in new construction projects. So, not your house right now, but new construction projects with what's called a REACH code. And that's because it reaches beyond Title 24 building energy standards that are set by the California Energy Commission. Natural gas is used to heat our homes, water, cook our food, and it makes up a large portion of the emissions in Southern California, including Thousand Oaks. So, natural gas in buildings is the second largest emission source, second only to transportation. So, it's pretty big chunk. And pound for pound, methane is 80 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide in the near term. So, eliminating costly gas infrastructure in new buildings is an easy and cost effective way to actually reduce our emissions, start chipping away at those. But if you're talking about, I think, Kathleen, the scenario of retrofitting an old building, which is what you presented with your wanting to keep your gas stove, well, there's rebates or credits that are often available to incentivize electrification upon sale or remodel. And that's a way to make the transition more affordable for people. And this is the great thing that I mentioned earlier about local control is that you can cater the types of programs to suit the needs of the community. So if people don't want to give up their gas stoves yet, maybe that's part of your policy is you're just incentivizing retrofitting upon remodel, but encouraging electric in new buildings.
oh, okay. And I was talking to a friend who's remodeling about this, and she's begun to look at electric stoves. We decided they're better than they used to be. So,
Yeah, and about that, I should put in a plug for induction cooktops because they're super awesome. They boil water like basically on demand. They're very precise temperature control. They're easy to clean, and they're also safer if you have pets and children because the element doesn't actually get hot. It just heats up the pot or the pan that you have on the
oh,
stove directly. So they're pretty cool. I mean, I think that if people tried them out, maybe they would be converted. Right now, it almost feels like this whole Apple PC kind of argument about whether you like gas or electric.
oh, right, right.
But people would probably like both if they tried them both, or like inductions if they tried them. So I'd encourage people to branch out and see if it's something that would work for you.
Okay, well, I'm reassured. Well, as usual, we're kind of running, close to time, but we have a couple more questions we need to answer. First of all, very briefly, why is natural gas dangerous? For example, I wasn't aware that gas can contribute to asthma in children, and
Mhm.
why is electricity better?
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, natural gas, it should be called fossil gas for one, because
Oh,
it is a fossil fuel, and natural and clean burning. Those are ad campaigns used by the oil and gas industry that have worked very well because it makes people sort of disassociate from the fact that it's actually a fossil fuel. It's a source of indoor air pollution. Gas stoves emit particulate matter, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide is emitted at 50 to 400% higher than homes without natural gas stoves.
oh my gosh.
And yeah, I had no idea either. And now that I know this, I'm always turning on my hood. I live in an apartment, so I don't really have a choice, but I'm always ventilating every time I use it now because I learned that children in homes with gas stoves are 42% more likely to have asthma than children in homes with electric stoves.
Oh my gosh.
Even the California Air Resources Board has addressed this and said that gas stoves cause indoor air pollution. So even our own state government has recognized that this is an issue. And not only that, but we live in earthquake country and we have dangerous, leaky gas pipes that could explode. It's just not a safe energy source, and it's not really forward future proof. It's not really forward thinking, because when we start um, making our grid more renewable, we're still going to have this gas piping infrastructure relying on gas for the next 15 to 20 years. So it's just not really a forward thinking technology.
Right. So it's going to continue using fossil fuels instead of renewable energy like solar and wind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our
Yeah.
grid is changing. I mean, even in Thousand Oaks, we're on a member of the Clean Power Alliance. So unless you opt out, you're 100% renewable right now. So if you're getting electric appliances, you're going more and more green as you're greening your home like that, because we're already relying on renewables on the grid.
Oh, okay, good. I have an electric oven, so at least I'm partway
That's
there.
great.
Okay, well, we're going to have to combine a couple of thoughts here. First of all, some actions that listeners can take to help mitigate climate change locally. And you could perhaps combine that with a few of the activist groups that you're affiliated with that people might look into.
Absolutely. Yeah. People who are feeling concerned about the climate crisis and want to get involved locally have a lot of options. And there's a lot of people who would love to have your help. If you like to, and it's all about finding what you like to do as an individual. So if you like
Uh-huh.
to protest, you can look up Fridays for Future, and they have a map and it shows you where all the protests are. There's some in Ojai. I run the one here in Thousand Oaks. That was the group that was inspired by Greta Thunberg and her activism. You can also go out for Citizens Climate Lobby. It's a great gateway organization for learning about skills and issues, especially on carbon tax and dividend. Um, you could also go try to volunteer for CFROG, Climate First Replacing Oil and Gas is what that stands for, or Sierra Club. If you're someone who wants to help stop risky projects, risky oil and gas projects here in Ventura County, we are oil country here because we have 3,500 active oil and gas wells in the county. So this is a great way to focus your activism locally. If you want to get involved in planning and policy, we have a 350 Ventura County Climate Hub. They're currently acting as the hub for local city coalitions like my Conejo Climate Coalition. There's also a Ventura Climate Coalition that's forming if you live in Ventura. So you can contact 350 Ventura County Climate Hub to learn more about those opportunities, or you can just reach out to Conejo Climate Coalition. We are online. We have a website with a newsletter that you can sign up for and social media. So you can find us multiple ways if you want to get involved in the Conejo Valley.
Okay, well, those are some great things for us to look up. Just one more question that I would love to ask you. What gives you hope on the days that existential despair makes you want to give up?
That's a good question. Yeah, we're all searching for that, aren't we? Well, I get lots of hope and recharge from working with other people towards a common goal. And I also like to follow a lot of people on social media that are doing good things, because it reminds me that there's a lot of people out there doing good things for our global
Uh-huh.
community. I also still have a lot of faith in humanity, because I think that we're capable of incredible amounts of change and ingenuity. And I also get a lot of hope and strength from watching an idea spread. So if you just plant that little seed in someone's mind, sometimes you can actually watch it turn into a decision that changes people's lives for the better. And I think that there is nothing more powerful and invigorating than that.
Oh, wow. It's like the wildflowers.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much, Kat Selm, co-founder of the Conejo Climate Coalition, for coming in today to speak to our listeners about your experience of becoming a climate change activist. This is KPPQ LP Ventura, 104.1 FM, and we're in the women's room where we appreciate and support each other. I'm your host, Kathleen Good.